Hyperlapses are so cool, so eye-catching, and one of the great things about them is that they look great as part of both a B-roll sequence and just by themselves, and they're not so difficult to do. Hi, my name is David Addison, and today I'm going to take you through 3 different methods of creating some awesome hyperlapses with your iPhone. So this first method requires the Moment app with the time-lapse mode installed, and you also need a gimbal. Now this is a DJI Osmo Mobile 3, but you can use any gimbal, it doesn't matter. And the key thing for this time-lapse is smoothness. That's why we're using the gimbal and the Moment app. So the first thing that you want to do after you put your phone on the gimbal is make sure that the grid is turned on. Now I like to use the golden ratio grid, and the reason I choose the golden ratio grid is because it's got this small little square in the middle, and when you turn the grids on in the Moment app, you also get these levels that you can use as sort of like a target to like keep your phone, to help keep your phone like fixed on the same point in the distance. And it just lends to what I was saying about smoothness. It's just keeping the phone on the same trajectory all the time as you're moving, you know, and it's not like, because you can't often tell if you're drifting if you don't use these grids. And you want to make sure that your colors aren't shifting as well as you're walking through your time lapse. So set your white balance, just set it to whatever looks good for your scene. There's no hard and fast rule. It just depends on wherever you are. And when it comes to exposure, there are arguments for just letting your exposure kind of just do what it wants, but I always recommend fixing your exposure when you're doing hyperlapses, because I don't want the exposure to keep changing. I don't trust the exposure compensation to adjust like naturally, especially when you're walking through a time lapse and everything is sped up. What looks like a natural shift in exposure when the lighting changes to you in real time, when you speed it up, it just looks really jerky. And you can see in this example here, as I'm walking both between direct sunlight and the shadows from the trees, the exposure just stays consistent as I'm walking. Next, something really important. All these points are really important, actually. If you don't do like one of these points, then the whole time lapse can fall apart. So the next one is setting the intervals to 1 second. We're going to be walking at quite a slow pace, and I found that 1 second intervals work really well. If you go for like 2 or 3 second intervals, then your time lapse is going to be more jerky. It's going to not last as long, and you're not going to have that level of flexibility when it comes to speeding it up and slowing it down. So we use 1 second just to get some more frames in there and help with the smoothness. And then that lends into the reason why we're using the Moment app in the first place, and that is because of its motion blur effect. So if you go down into the corner and tap effect just by the manual controls, and then set the motion blur to 0.5. So for every 1 second interval, you're going to get 0.5, half a second worth of motion blur, and I found that works best. You can try 1 second, see if you like it, but I don't like too much motion blur. I still want to see some clarity, some detail there, so I like 0.5. And with that, you're good to go. And like I said, just keep walking slowly, try and keep that point fixed somewhere in the distance. And if you see an obstacle coming in the distance, like, don't wait until you're right up on it and then move to the side and go around it. Try and react as soon as you can, because like I said, you think you're being subtle in real time, but when you speed it up in that time lapse, it's just jerky, it's just all over the place, so it's not going to work. Right, so in the Moment app, like this is pretty much it. There's nothing to do after you export the time lapse. This is one of the great things about it. The time lapse is pretty much done, unless you want to color grade it or something like that. So when it comes to exporting, just export the best settings that you can. You want the highest quality if you have enough space on your phone. You want the highest resolution possible because you can always crop it down later. And when it comes to frame rate, I always go for 13, but it's just what you want to do, really. And that is the first time-lapse method complete. But before we move on to this next time-lapse method, which is the walking normal pace while the world whizzes by method, I do want to mention that the reason I'm making this video is, yes, I do think these hyperlapses look awesome, but I originally had this video scheduled for a couple of weeks' time. I brought it forward to today because my Moment app tutorial was supposed to be released today, but It's obviously not here. It's so epic and so detailed that I've had to delay, and it's already been like over 10 days without a video. I didn't want you folks to think that I'd abandoned you, that I'd stopped uploading, that I'd forgotten about you, or anything like that. So don't worry, the Moment app tutorial is coming. Right, on to the second method, the walking normally while the world whizzes by. So this method, you can do it handheld. This example that you're watching right now is handheld, but I like to use the gimbal again just for added smoothness. Now there's a few crucial elements to this one as well, and one of them is that you have to walk at the exact same cadence all the time. You have to keep your cadence really consistent, so your foot is hitting the ground on the same beat every single time. And for that, you can download a metronome app. So the one that I use is a free one called Metro Timer, and it's really easy to set up and use. And one of the great things about it is it's going to work in the background while your camera app is operating in the foreground. So that's really important. So once you've got your metronome downloaded, you can use literally any camera app that allows you to control the manual settings. So you could stick with the Moment app that we've just used. You can use Procam 8, you can use Beastcam, Filmic Pro, anything like that, whatever you like. So I'm going to stick with the Moment app, but this time I'm not going to be in time-lapse mode, I'm going to be in the video mode. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to set the frame rate to 24 frames per second. The next thing, again, I'm going to set the white balance so the colors aren't shifting. And then, and this is very important, you want to set your shutter speed to a 50th of a second. And then with the ISO, just use the ISO to balance the exposure to whatever looks good for your scene. And that's pretty much the whole setup. So when you're ready to go into your metronome app, set the beats per minute to 124. And that means that every time it beeps, your foot has to touch the floor on that beat. So you might have to get used to that over a few steps, and it'll feel really fast at first, but it's not so fast once you get used to it. And you want to do this for quite a long time, because one of the key things to this effect is speeding up the footage later to 2400%. And when you do that, like a 5-minute walk becomes, you know, it passes by in an instant. So the longer you can walk, the better. And like I said, we are going to be speeding the footage up. So I use Final Cut Pro. You can use any app that was going to allow you to speed the footage up 2400%. And that looks like this. So here I've got my normal walking video. And when you speed it up, you can see what effect that has. And you can get quite creative with this effect. You don't have to just walk pointed down at your own feet. You can film someone else, you can film at a different angle. Don't be afraid to get creative with it. And the last method that I'm going to show you involves taking individual photos and then stitching them together. Not so much stitching them together, playing them back later in your editing software. So for this one, it's really key that, again, your settings are the same, your white balance, your exposure, and things like that. The most important thing this time is keeping yourself focused on the same point every single time you take a photo. So for that, I'm going to use Camera M because it's got this really cool grid that's like a cross. So you've got a point, and the levels also have like this little target included. So you can keep whatever you're taking the hyperlapse of in the crosshairs. So here I'm taking a hyperlapse of my brother, and I'm going to be moving around him, kind of like bullet time. So I've got my white balance set, I've got my exposure set. I'm in Pro Raw just because, I don't know, I've given Pro Raw a hard time, so I wanted to use it again. And I'm focusing on his ear to start off with, and I'm just taking a photo, and I'm taking a small step, and I'm taking another photo, and I'm taking another very small step. So here each photo is going to represent one frame in the time lapse. So I'm going to take my photos into Darkroom, and I'm going to edit them so they all look the same. Export them as hikes or JPEGs, whatever, because ProRAW provides DNG. So I'm going to take the pictures as hikes into Final Cut Pro. I'm going to highlight them all, press Ctrl D, and then I'm going to type in the number 1 and press enter. And that's going to reduce all of the pictures to one single frame. And I'm going to render them because as good as the M1 MacBook Pro is, it won't play these back smoothly unrendered. So I'm going to press Ctrl R to render my selection and then play them back. And of course, because these are photos, I'm going to need to crop them into a video aspect ratio, and you can apply any effect that you want, whatever takes your fancy. And that is my last method for creating a cool hyperlapse effect with your phone. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if you've watched this video and you get like inspired to go out and create your own hyperlapses, upload them to Instagram and feel free to tag me. I'd love to see your results and maybe take some ideas from you folks as well. So feel free to be as creative as possible. And like I said, keep an eye out for my Moment app tutorial. It was supposed to be up today. I was filming it on Wednesday and I was like, no, not a chance. So I put this video together within like 2 days. I was like, I can't leave them hanging any longer. It's been over 10 days without a video. They're gonna wonder why they subscribed. So I need something of value, something entertaining, something interesting to give the people, to give the audience. So here you go. Let me know what you thought. David out.